Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rollout. I'm Linsay Rousseau.
And I'm Genevieve Marie. Hello and welcome.
So obviously, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness has been out for a while now. We did not talk about it at the time, but it is now on Disney Plus. So we took that as an opportunity to re-examine the film and have even more thoughts now than we did after the initial viewing of said film. Why don't you take it away, Jen?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I've watched this movie twice. Once while I was doing chores in my house, and then another time where I actually sat down to watch the thing.
And I originally saw it in theaters, so I did see it on the big screen.
Yes, I did give this 2 watches, one actually serious rewatch, and I have thoughts. I have thoughts. I have questions. I was raging about Doctor Strange's fugly fucking wig the whole time.
Yeah, which is weird because we didn't have that complaint after the first one.
His hairpiece makes me so mad. Like both.
I mean, it's not in Humans bad, but it's up there.
Both of these hair pieces make me so mad. That's not what we're talking about today, though.
No. We will just set that aside as,
we'll put
one of our lesser
what a lesser concern. We will put a pin in that one. That is not to say I did not enjoy the movie. That's not to say that, I didn't find it fun.
There are elements, of course, Benedict Cumberbatch is a fantastic actor, and like a lot of the MCU characters, this role fits him very well, I think. But there was this is also a similar critique that we've had with some other things that we've reviewed, that the acting is what kind of helped save writing that we had some issues with.
Had some thoughts about. So it's a Sam Raimi movie.
Yes, it is. And it was marketed as pseudo horror.
Yes. And in the spirit of things, it very much was a Sam Raimi movie. But to the point that it felt dated to me. And
it had a feel to it. It really did.
And this is, when I say it felt dated, this is not like a ding. That is a very neutral statement at the moment. It felt like movies from that I grew up with, that, in the past, that I had seen in the past, like growing up with the first, on screen, big blockbuster Spider-Man. Right. Like, it really did have that same flavor, that same texture to it. And I thought that was both fun, but then might have also tipped us into the realm of, there is a baby screaming its head off outside. I am sorry. If you hear that.
I do not hear it.
Okay. Audience, if you hear that, just ignore it.
Ignore it.
I think they're almost gone. That when you're taking a style of film, you're taking a certain genre, that has a lot of history in it, and especially what I am going to call the crazy mom trope.
Yes. Yes. Which we obviously started to see that in WandaVision.
Right. You are going to have to somehow make that story, because we've seen it 1,000 times before, and there has been an evolution of the crazy mom trope, in which I will briefly go into later. But when you're taking something that is so genre defining, when you're taking a character arc in a narrative that is so popular and was so popular throughout most of film history, you're going to have to do something different with it. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to turn it on its head. You're going to have to either subvert the narrative, spin it a different way, and make us look at this trope, this character type, and have different feelings about it, have a different, tell a different story rather than the one we've seen 1,000 times.
Yes.
For me personally, I don't think that this movie did that.
No, and which really, I wish I could say it surprised me. It did not surprise me. It saddened me that we've seen so much progress coming from Marvel in their treatment of female characters. Check out our review of Miss Marvel. We loved what she did with the character there. We've got America Chavez coming, which is looking great. We're getting She-Hulk. So, Marvel has had not the greatest track record when it comes to their female representation, as Scarlett Johansson has made apparent in many interviews that she has given about the evolution of Black Widow during the 10-year, term that she was in it. And they kind of just fell back into this. And again, looking at who's on the writing staff, it's being done by dudes, which I think is part of the reason as to how we ended up here. And I think there could have been a lot more compelling way to get Scarlet Witch to this quote unquote evil version of herself without going down this, like you said, very overused trope.
I think, when you have male writers, male director, a mostly male produced piece of media, and the female is a villain.
Yeah,
it is very hard to it is very hard for people who do not live the experiences, like who cannot be mothers, like if you're a cis male and you are just, writing from that perspective, you're never going to be able to have the insight into what it is like to be a mother or have the potential to be a mother. Like I don't want to be a mom.
I also do not. Yes.
But the fact that as far as I know, I can get pregnant, I could have a child. There is a lot of pressure. There are a lot of horror elements in that possibility. And especially nowadays, where the options are being whittled down to just nightmarish types of outcomes for myself if I were to get pregnant.
Right.
But I would be able to write something in the perspective of being a cis woman, supposedly, as far as I know, able to have a child.
Right.
Whereas a cis male does not have the same pressures, does not have the same experiences, the everyday experience of having to either take birth control or having to use like some form of contraceptive, or because the onus of contraceptives,
it's on the woman,
always been on the woman. Society, just in plain terms speaking, like that is just how our society views things, that the onus is on the woman to make sure that she does not get pregnant.
Right.
However, when you're taking the crazy mom trope and you're trying to write that character into, when you're trying to write some sympathy for that character and you're trying to kind of put some nuance to that character, it's very hard when you don't have that experience. So what are you going to do? You're going to look back at other pieces of media that have that like crazy mom trope in it, and you are going to start to look at how those stories ended up, how those stories went, and you're going to be like, okay, so this is kind of a good roadmap for where I need to go with my story. And if you don't go out and like talk to other women about these things, if you don't like get,
and we're not saying that the writers didn't do that and aren't fathers and you know, all
Right.
of those things. Obviously, they probably, maybe, hopefully did ask some people. But it
Hopefully.
didn't, yes, but it didn't translate well if they did.
Right.
If they didn't, then they should have. But if they did, it did not translate well.
And God only knows what happened on the cutting room floor.
Of course, of
Because
course.
you know, like you start with one movie and then it goes into post-production and it can turn into a completely different film. I mean, we've seen this with Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Which we're not even going to touch that. But let's define the crazy
Yes.
mom. Let's start by giving a brief history of where in film where that kind of comes from. And I want to start with, and there have been other movies that have done this before this film, but I think this film solidified in the horror genre the crazy mother trope. And I would have to say that it's Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Psycho. Yep, absolutely.
It's Psycho, 100%.
100%.
Even though the mother is actually dead,
right,
she still is
her presence. And
her presence, her, like, you don't know that she's not dead the first time watching it unless it's been spoiled for you. I mean, and back then when people were going into it,
there was no social media. There was, exactly.
You know, if you're going into the film cold, then you see this, you know, this insane mother pulling at the strings and kind of like skittering across the brain of her son and manipulating him and making him believe like, oh, all women are evil and this, you know, and that, like, you know, you're shameful for wanting to flirt with this woman. And, you know, she's also, you know, she's bad news. She's a bad, you know, woman, and it goes into the slut shaming thing. And then like ultimately this crazy mom is, you know, she is technically she's positioned as and framed as the person and the reason why the killer goes insane.
Yeah.
You
and
know?
this is honestly, and I think a lot of this traipses back to a lot of Freudian ideas. Whereas Freud was like,
very
the
much
basis of all men's psychosis is mommy issues, you know? Yes.
So, you know, fast forward, and, you know, you get into the 60s and the 70s, and you get films like The Omen and Rosemary's Baby, and you have this very this very interesting idea. I mean, The Exorcist doesn't really play into this, but it kind of, she's a, you know, there's a mother in it. And the fears at the time were very much kind of the same. Is like women were able to enter the workforce. Women were able now, you know, were then able to like start to have careers and make their own money and make their own income. And Hollywood at the time wanted to posit that as kind of a problem.
What? Women having their own autonomy? What?
And the reason why this is because Hollywood wanted to frame having a child as basically and these demon children, especially with The Omen, especially with Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist, as the mother is not taking care of her child. The mother is, you know, ignoring the issue that's right in front of her, which is this demon child, because, you know, she's got a career, she's going to work, you know, she's got to split herself between the family and between having, you know, and between a career.
And of course, I would say prior to that, the crazy mother trope was the and they still have this to some extent, was the all-consuming smothering. I mean, like in Psycho, like the smothering controls every aspect of their lives because they're not out at work. So it's like we lose either way. It's like either the mom's at home all the time, not working, smothering the child, or she's away neglecting the child. It's like, really, we can't win.
So you have the smother mother, you have the mother, you have the absent mother who, you know, who can't take care of her child as well as it should be taken care of. And there's a demon in the home and you have to exorcise that demon. You have to, you know, you have to expel it from the home. And that is the reason why things are going wrong. Is like, oh, there's, you know, there's something strange in the water. And it's like, oh, what is it? Oh, it's female autonomy.
Yeah.
Oh shit. And there was just a lot of anxiety centered around the destabilizing of what was considered at the time normal family values and gender roles. And then so we move on from the 60s and the 70s. And I mean, I'm not listing everything. I'm just going to kind of like give each era its know, a couple examples. And then you move on from the 60s and 70s from the anxiety of gender roles and, you know, the family unit being broken apart into what I would consider, into the 80s, where I would consider this a very interesting turning point, because now horror films are all about like the fear of invasion, like body invasion, like Alien and Aliens is a perfect example of that. The threat comes from having being invaded, you know, and you know, the threat of having your life basically turned upside down through the horror of impregnation, and your freedom, your autonomy taken away. And I will say that these movies were written and directed by men who the idea wasn't exactly as feminist as you would think. I mean, it turned out to be pretty feminist, you know, from if you wanted to read into it that way. But the idea for when they were writing Alien and Aliens was more so the idea that like being pregnant is like, it is like an alien invasion, and it is very like scary, and oh, so many things can go wrong, and oh, it's, you know, like it's gross and terrifying, and it doesn't show much sympathy towards the people who are getting impregnated. It doesn't show sympathy, like it doesn't really go into that fear that much, or that anxiety, or that, you know, that social issue. It doesn't touch on any of those social issues. It's just impregnation, very scary. What happens if, and also very, to my point, very, very much so, what if men get pregnant? Oh God, so scary. Could you only imagine men if you got pregnant? How awful would be that?
I don't know. We have an entire movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger about that. So, you know,
just like big chest burst, big death.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't exactly focused on female anxieties as much as it posited the idea that like, hey, men, what would happen if like, put yourself, and I don't even think it was a put yourself in their shoes type narrative. I mean, it could be read as that, but it didn't really come off as that. I think it was just more very surface level. And I absolutely love Alien and Aliens, but the surface level is just, what happened if men come pregnant? And it's just like, oh, it big scary. Yeah. And you're like, okay, yeah, it is big scary. And Sigourney Weaver in underwear. So,
I mean, that too.
So, you know, which not big scary.
No.
which not big scary, that big yay.
Right.
But then you get into the 90s, and then you have movies. I don't know if this is 90s, early 2000s, but then you have Morrison. This is definitely early 2000s, is movies like Shutter Island, where you feel sympathy for the mom slash moms. There's two moms that are shown to us in the film,
Right.
who killed their children. And Hollywood would never have been able to go in that direction. Especially The Others was the first one that I remember that they really that was really like a blockbuster hit that had this subject matter in it. And you see there is a lot more sympathy for that position, because you'd seen cases like in real life of this happening, and how women and their anxieties and their mental illnesses cause them to do horrible things to their families.
Right.
And in those movies, especially not so much with Shutter Island, because that one centers on a male protagonist, but
whereas in the others we have Nicole Kidman.
In the others you have Nicole Kidman, and it centers on her. It really, you kind of see this switch from the crazy overbearing mother, which she was undoubtedly overbearing because she had to be because of her children's illnesses. And she definitely went crazy there, and very loose definition, that's not very PC to say, but she had a mental break, and she had mental illness, and that overtook her and caused her to do the unthinkable.
Right.
And the movie gives you a very sympathetic view of that.
Right.
And it doesn't, where in all of these past movies, you see most of the time the women who are crazy moms, they get punished. There's punishment for, for the way that they've been treating their kids, or there's punishment for, daring to have a mental illness.
Right. I mean, and that also speaks to the issue of representing women as being out of control of their emotions, which goes to this trope, but is also used in lots of other things in Hollywood, that, women are emotional, they can't control their emotions, which we see in Scarlet Witch and Wanda's character to the extreme as well. Like literally her powers are out of control because her emotions are out of control. And so representing women as these emotional beings that aren't in control of themselves, which is why they can't ever be in positions of power, because they'll be impulsive and, bullshit excuses like that, without taking a look, things like postpartum depression weren't even talked about until 10, 20 years ago, if that, and it's still, kind of taboo to have a conversation about women not loving their babies or being depressed after being, that's still very much a taboo issue. And of course, we know that society has a hard time understanding mental illness and treating mental illness to begin with. And now we're seeing, and then, so of course that manifests itself in film.
Right. My light died.
Oh,
ignore it. Ignore it. Just don't watch. Just listen like it's a podcast.
It's okay. Well, we have this on podcast.
Yes. And so with this brief, not brief little overview of film history, I want to go back to, I want to then circle round back to the movie that we're talking about, and say, and all of that was to say that you have the evolution of going from movies like Psycho to movies where you've got the crazy mom, and even The Haunting of Hill House also very much has that same element in it as well, where ultimately the mom gets possessed and she is the one to kill the one child, and then lure the other children back to the house. And And you can see, and I mean, that I love The Haunting of Hill House. I thought it was very good. But you can see the evolution of having just the quote unquote crazy mom be very much the villain, unquestionably always having her die at the end, or having her have been dead the whole time.
We can take that back. Yeah. And we can even take that back further to fairy tales. I mean, if we look at like Hansel and Gretel, the crazy old witch who eats children, if we look at Snow White, the crazy witch who, you know, wants to kill Snow White, we look at Cinderella, you know, there's all these,
the crone
Cinderella,
character.
literally, she is called the evil stepmother. It's like you have all these tropes of crazy women killing kids, crazy women hating kids, you know.
Right.
And yes, like you said, they either die at the end or, you know, have their comeuppance or something.
Or somehow they are punished.
Right.
The rare exception to this, I think, is the others. I mean, like, ultimately they're all dead. So,
Right.
you know, what are you gonna do? Like, but I think that because Nicole was the protagonist throughout the entire movie, you can't just, you know, outright punish her and be like, this is all your fault, blah blah blah. I think you have to have sympathy for your main character, and end it in a way that is satisfying. So I think that is one of the rare exceptions of the trope. With WandaVision, Wanda starts off like, they try very hard to put her in a like in sort of a murky waters type of position, where in the beginning it's like, yes, she's a mother, she's going through a lot of pain, she has, you know, and if you didn't watch WandaVision, then you're kind of just fuck you,
right.
You know, you don't have that context at all, really. But you know, she's grieving the loss of her, you know, of her husband, she's grieving the loss of her children, she has, you know, the potential to get her children back, and so, you know, you can feel for that position, of course you can. But then they make it so that there is a point of no return for her character.
Yep.
Where she attacks the sanctum and blows it to bits and kills, probably, I would imagine, hundreds of people.
Yep.
And that is at the very beginning of the movie. So you are giving this character, unless you're going to be like, yeah, we don't care about like all of the people that you just killed, and, you know, ultimately give her a happy ending. Right. They gave her a point of no return right at the beginning. You could have made her the villain of this story without having a point of no return.
No, because she'd already mind manipulated hundreds of people in WandaVision. I mean, that alone was pretty bad. So they could have just left it at that.
Like, what they could have done was have her attack the sanctum, then have Wong evacuate everybody, like, see, like, oh, this is a lost cause, like, she's just going to tear it all down, and then have them all flee, and then avoid the massive amounts of you know, NPC deaths, we'll say.
Exactly.
You know, and that way, you know, in that way, you could have her exist in this sort of like, will she, won't she, is she bad, is she, you know, is she going to turn back to good sort of moment, without her being like Darth Vader, who's like killed everybody that he comes in, you know, comes in contact with. Where Darth Vader, there was no room for his character to live on and redeem himself after that. He has his moment of redemption, but ultimately the story needs him to die. And that is what they did with Wanda, is she had her point of no return at the very beginning. She wasn't tested in a way. Whereas if you had her point of no return in the twist in the second act, or even in the third act, where that is, you know, she has to choose between killing a literal child, because I think that one is the big moral.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That is the big moral question that is given to her character. The big, this is the moment, that literally is the point of no return. And if they had that at the end and have that be the only person that she was, that she either kills or does not kill, like the question is up in the air at that point in the movie, then you could have had her redeem herself and then really given her a nice, thorough arc in which she doesn't have to kill herself at the end. It's kind of ridiculous that we have a falling rocks death moment for her at the end, like the most annoying type of villain death there ever was. Like, I can't think of a more like Disney death than like, oh, falling rocks, oh, they slipped and fell off a cliff, like, oh no. That was just very like, they killed her because they had to. Yes. And that's not to say that she is like absolutely dead because, it's Marvel. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, this movie wants you to believe that she is dead. And they wrote themselves into a corner because they had her point of no return at the very beginning. Yeah. They had her do an unforgivable thing by killing a whole bunch of people at the very beginning, which prior to that, she had not done.
Right. She had only, and again, we're not saying manipulation is a good thing, but yes, she had not killed anyone.
She had enough on her docket to mark her as a villainous character, somebody who is formidable, somebody who, yes, you do want to run from this person. I honestly thought that the battle at the Sanctum, like, it really didn't do anything for me emotionally, except for be like, oh, she's just fucking killing a lot of people. Yeah. Okay. Like, it kind of was a moment of pause for me, because at that moment I'm like, oh, so they're really just having her just blow through a bunch of people regardless of, any type of morals. Like, I guess it was supposed to, the function of it was supposed to be she's willing to do anything to get what she
including killing her other selves, which, again, begs the big gaping hole question, which others have posited. Why didn't she just go to a universe where she was dead and fill dead Wanda's shoes and be a mother? It's like, yeah. So she's literally killing herself.
Right. Which is also a great point of no return moment as well. Like, but those two things would have worked perfectly together. Right. Because it happens at the exact same time. The having to choose between killing America Chavez and having to kill her alternate self happens at the exact same time. So you could have had these two very large moral quandaries working in tandem together to give her this big decision, except we already know that she, at the end of the day, that she is the villain. There is no turning back for her. Mm-hmm. There is no going back to the Avengers, because she's just killed a whole bunch of fucking people without thought. And so we know how this movie is going to end, more or less. Either A, she's just going to continue to be a villain and be on the run from the Avengers the rest of her life, or she's going to die. Right. Either way, you're ending up with one of your larger female characters that you have had since,
Well, and she's had more screen time. I believe the quote is that she's had more screen time than any other actor or any other character in the MCU to date.
She's been with us since phase 2.
Yep.
And like, really, when you think about it, she like is the second most prominent female character Avenger, quote unquote, that you've had, Black Widow being the first in the MCU. And what do? You kill her off.
Right.
That it's just, again, it's bringing a couple of things into play that I find very annoying that Marvel keeps doing. It's they're introducing female characters and then they're writing them out.
Right. Well, and to be fair, her early appearances in phase 2, I mean, her character was essentially a space filler. She was so underutilized in her early outings in the MCU. I mean, she was a shell of a person. They just did very poor justice to her. And I think WandaVision was their attempt to make up for that, but then it just set up this whole clusterfuck of a movie.
Well, they did the groundwork.
Yeah.
And they did the groundwork for us to make us sympathize and make us enjoy the character of Scarlet Witch. And, you know, they laid the groundwork so well that, you know, now doing what they did, it's kind of a big loss. I mean, that's not to say that other universe Wandas aren't going to come out, but like the OG, whatever like our universe number is, Wanda is gone essentially. And so that background that we've had with her, you know, that journey that we have taken with her is all for naught, because whatever new Wanda we're going to get isn't going to be the same Wanda. They're not going to have the same emotional arc or journey. And so it's like, well, why do I, you know, like it kind of tarnishes, it kind of makes you ask the question of why do I care about this one when we had a perfectly good other one that you just wasted in one film. There were ways to handle this character and ways to handle this trope in this genre that wasn't, and I'm going to go back to the term dated because that's what it was, that's how it felt, because they just took tropes and genres and they wrote them like they were business as usual. They didn't do anything to subvert our expectations. They didn't do anything to turn the crazy mom trope on its head.
Exactly. It would have been really interesting.
Right. They had a crazy mom. They had her basically run around and do horrible things. And then at the end, she has, you know, she comes to grips with the fact that, oh my God, like, what have I done? And in the end, she faces punishment for, going off and doing a big,
which we thought we'd already done at the end of WandaVision. She realizes what she's done. She realizes she's probably never an Avenger again because of what she's done. So it's like, wait, why did we just rehash the exact same thing we did, but made it 10 times worse?
Well, I mean, the excuse that they're using is the dark hold, like that possessed her mind and twisted her mind. However, that is absolutely fine. And you could have had pretty much the same exact story, except for at the end, have the, like, because she's already killed people. So you don't have that sort of like, this is the last step into true villainy and villainhood and the point of no return. They had that in the beginning. She already did that. So there is no like, oh, Wanda, don't do this. Like, if you do this, there's no going back. No going back.
Right.
Because she already did it. So we're just like, oh, well, she already did it. So
now we're just
gonna fuck it, you know, like what's one more alternate universe I don't know, you know, like they could have built up to that moment and they could have made that a lot more poignant and they could have sold it to us a lot better. I'm not saying that the performances of the actors weren't fantastic, that I didn't feel for her at the end there, you know, when she did ultimately see what she was doing, but it could have been so much more hard hitting and a better story if they had just tweaked a few things. And all they had to do to really turn the trope on its head was to have her realize what she was doing and go back, and then have her, you know, have to kind of live with this part of herself that she knows is dangerous. And like, that is just going to further enrich her character,
and
rather
you know,
than write her the fuck out.
Well, and the thing is that Marvel went to so much effort to do that with Loki. Yeah. It's like Loki was in a very similar situation. I mean, he's killed people. He's evil. He's good. He's evil. He's good. He's, you know, kind of this ambiguous, you know, you don't really know what side he's on, but we all love and relate to him. And he's one of the, you know, most well-liked MCU character there is. And it's like, well, you gave Loki his own spin-off show to show how he can be good after he's already killed lots and lots of people. He ultimately sacrifices himself for Thanos, but it's like, why could Scarlet Witch, Wanda, not have a similar story arc? And yes, she's done horrible things. And to be fair, Black Widow used to do horrible things. I mean, granted, we're saying she was brainwashed at the time, but like, you know, Natasha's constantly spending her life having to live with what she did. I mean, we saw that in the Black Widow movie. She was coming face to face with her past demons. And it's like, well, if you can do it for these other characters, why did we literally just write off this character?
It's because she has a vagina. And it's the same, you know, it's the same with Black Widow as well. The fact that she died over Clint, the way that they framed it really bothered me a lot.
Made me so mad.
Because they, in a way, they were saying that like she was less valuable, because of certain things about her past, and a lot of that also played into the fact that she was not a mother.
Well, and that's the thing.
She did not have children. She could not have children.
And we've had this conversation.
Barton had a family.
Right. We've had this conversation before that single women apparently, or motherless women inherently are less important
than childless women
than those with families. You as an individual, as an independent single woman, have less value if you have not decided to be a mother. So therefore, she had to die because Clint had a family. But her autonomy as an individual didn't matter. Like, and that we see that in, I mean, and that's another trope that we see over and over, is that, oh, mothers are inherently better than motherless children. And like, you still see those prejudices today within society, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, you also see that, you know, Black Widow, ScarJo, we shall say.
ScarJo.
She made so many sacrifices in that movie, as it was. Like, you saw the toll everything was taking on her and how hard that she fought. And then you have Clint Barton, who just like fucked off to Japan to become a white ninja.
Also, by the way, kills a shit ton of people and is still an Avenger.
Who kills a shit ton of people in service of him going basically on like a revenge rager, which is probably the most toxic masculine thing to happen, you know, in a while. Like, he, and even they like position him as kind of going a little bit cuckoo and just going off on like a killing spree. And like, yeah, he's going after like bad people, but it's also like, you don't really, they just kind of give that some lip service and they're like, oh, it's only the bad people. And it's like, but was there like fallout for what he did? And I mean, you saw that in Hawkeye, like, yes, there was definitely fallout from what he did. But then you have then you have Black Widow, who is working to build bridges, who is basically like became Captain America and Nick Fury all rolled up in one, like carrying everything on her back.
Yeah.
And her reward is to die.
Right.
Whereas Clint Barton's reward, going off on a killing spree and becoming a white ninja in Japan, is to live because, oh, he has so much to live for. His family.
Right.
It's not enough to bring Clint Barton's family back and ensuring that they will be back and have a full and wonderful life. You also have to make sure that Clint can be with that family. And the fact that we're rewarding somebody whose behavior was, you know, so poor, and positioning him next to another character whose behavior was going, you know, far above and beyond the call of duty, and rewarding the one who was shitty and punishing the one who, you know, ultimately like made all of this shit happen, held everybody together.
And has the ultimate rehabilitation arc, you know, it's like she goes from vengeful assassin to savior of the universe.
Then it even kind of puts into question, like, well, then why should women do anything good then, if they're just going to be
we can't win if we have kids, we can't win if we don't have kids, we're crazy either way, you know.
Right. If at the end of all of your Herculean labors, you're then expected to huck yourself off a cliff.
Yeah.
What the fuck is the point?
Yep.
Like, exactly. There is no reward there at the end. It's ridiculous. Whereas your male counterpart can act as shitty as he wants to, and at the end be given the ultimate prize.
Right,
like,
exactly.
Fuck that.
Right.
Oh God, that movie made me so mad. And it also, the extension of that, the Avengers, the second Avengers, Age of Ultron, started it all, making me so, and Joss fucking Whedon.
Yeah.
People didn't realize, that makes me so mad too, is that people are like, oh, he's such a feminist. Oh, he
gave us Buffy.
Good work with women, and he gave us Buffy. I always thought he was a hack, and I always thought that he handled his female characters like shit. And guess who the fuck was right at the end of the day?
Yep.
Everybody's like, I'm so surprised. I'm like, you're so surprised? You're fucking surprised. The writing was on the wall, at least to me, at least to probably the majority of women.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yes, you can give us characters that are able to fight and kick ass, but that doesn't mean you're giving us well nuanced, you know, like well-rounded, non-tropic female characters. Because Buffy and all the women in that show were still tropes. I mean, yes, they kicked ass. And, you know, I was on like rah-rah team Buffy for a while, but it's like, you know, she was no Xena warrior princess. So it's like.
Right. I mean, these types of film and TV, they're taking steps forward, but they're also taking steps forward whilst these projects are being helmed by cis men. And that in itself puts a lens and a perspective on something that is already a couple steps away from being reality, from being a woman's reality and a woman's experience. And like, yes, it steps forward, but also what type of lens are we looking at these things through? Because what we have been given in the past is going to shape what we think is reality, what we think is good representation, and what we think is good storylines for women, in which we are still constantly having these fights over media that's coming out nowadays and being like, oh, like, you just gave us, you know, strong female character, and like no actual character. You know, you gave us a cardboard cutout of a person, and I'm so disappointed in you, Marvel. I'm so disappointed in you, DC. And you are having these discussions, you know, with your friends and online, and you're having these critiques, and yet you're still having the majority of these women being written by cis men. You're still having the majority of the writers' room and the production team being men. And it's only recently that they're actually inviting more people to the table.
And it's to their credit when they do. So again, watch our episode on Miss Marvel. That's where they hit the head, you know, they hit the whatever the fuck they did it right. They had women in the writers' room. And of course, I'm very interested to see what they do with the Marvels, because that entire movie is going to be teenage girl, you know, badass veteran. You know, we've got all lead females. I'm very interested to see what they're going to do with She-Hulk, even though it's been getting a lot of early, you know, shit reviews. But getting those women in the writers' room, Wonder Woman aside, and I still would really like to know just how much of that script Patty Jenkins wrote. Wonder Woman aside, which is a horrible example of how a quote unquote woman wrote a female character. But when they bring these women into the writer's room, it makes a world of difference, because I feel like, I don't know, if I had been reading early scripts of Doctor Strange, I probably would have either laughed or thrown it out and been like, no, we can't do this. So I feel like, was there anybody in that writer's room that raised a hand and said, hey, maybe we shouldn't go this route? Or did anyone not even bother to think that this was something that we shouldn't do?
That could be problematic. And to be honest, like, this movie wasn't terrible. This movie wasn't a bad movie. This movie was a very competent film. I enjoyed it when I watched it, but this was just the largest mistake that I saw that they made in the film, that it could have been elevated from a fun mystical romp to something that actually had something to say. And, you know, a film that actually had a point of view and that could twist a narrative trope and a character trope that has been done to death into something that we haven't seen before. But it's business as usual, as it tends to be with female characters. And I wouldn't say it took us any steps backwards. I would just say it just left us exactly where we are. It didn't move the meter forwards or backwards. It just is literally business as usual. And it didn't have to be that way. And I think you could have had a stronger like emotional impact if the question was rather not, can we stop the Scarlet Witch? Can she stop herself? But rather, is she going to become fully villainous, fully evil? And because they already had answered that question, she already did the unforgivable thing in the beginning of the movie. And she cannot be an Avenger anymore. So then what is she? She's an enemy. She's a villain. And we have to, you know, we have to destroy her. And that's ultimately what happens. And that, again, is just, that's boring.
It is.
And then also,
no, go ahead.
I just also wanted to touch on the fact that it is so much easier to forgive Loki, unfortunately, because we have seen so many examples of white male, you know, he's not cis, he's gender fluid, but we have seen so many examples of male characters in film history having so many different storylines, so many different roles. and so many different and nuanced stories that you can have leeway with a character like Loki, who has done horrible, despicable things. Whereas the representation for women is so narrow when it is in the horror genre that there's only so many paths that you can tread and, you know, have your audience be like, oh yeah, I believe that, I'll go along with this, you know? And so, like, when you have her killing people at the beginning, you have to have her to die or be on the run at the end. You cannot redeem that character, because in our lexicon, that type of woman is irredeemable.
Exactly. And you know, this, like you said, we've got so many examples of male stories. It's like, we have so many examples of men who seem irredeemable being redeemed, and so few examples of and so many examples of the irredeemable woman. So why is it men can do these horrible, horrible things and be redeemed, and yet women have no chance of that, or at least a very limited chance, as we are talking in pop culture, of course? It's like, why?
That discussion,
that's a bigger discussion, which
is a huge discussion.
We'll leave you with that.
But yes, I'm sure if y'all think real hard, you'll be able to come up with some very poignant examples as to why that is. They might be a little bit too heavy for this show today, right now. But yeah, just I guess that's the thoughts that we're gonna leave you guys with. Again, Doctor Strange, I didn't hate it. I rather enjoyed it. And the only thing that I actually really did despise at the end of the day was those fucking wigs.
The wigs. So if that's your takeaway from this episode, it's all about the wigs.
Somebody fucking meme those wigs, GIF those wigs, shame them so we don't have to see them ever again, please, for the love of God.
And also give us better female representation, you know, it's fine. But
that's a side note.
Yeah.
Really what we actually need is better wigs for men.
Awesome. We obviously did a deep dive today, and we thank you for joining us for this journey, but these are just some issues that have been percolating in our minds for a while.
I obviously had some time to think about this one. Most of these examples just kind of swirling around in my head, and then I just word vomited them to you guys. But I honestly think that not a lot of people have been looking at this movie in this way.
They have.
And I thought that it was kind of important to kind of like take this angle with it today. Like, we could have talked about so many other things with this movie. But honestly, I thought that this was the take that was, in my mind, the most important. You know, moving forward with the MCU.
Awesome.
But anyway,
if you like this episode and want to check out our other stuff, of course, as always, like, subscribe, and we will be bringing you more great content where sometimes we review, sometimes we go off the rails, but and it's not even off the rails. It's stuff that needs to be talked about, and we're talking about it.
Yeah, and if you want to see our review on Miss Marvel and the MCU doing women things right, then go check that one out. And we will see you in the next one. All right, so this is the rollout, and
we will
geek with you next week. That's it. That's the one.
I feel like we should just make signs.
I need a sticky note, like, right in the corner of my screen.
All right, guys. Bye.
All right. Bye.